Hello and welcome to Wallcrest. My name is Mickey and I'm so excited to share with you how to sew this charming and versatile Swan bag. It's a delightful little project for anyone looking for a practical yet stylish everyday bag. This bag's standout feature is its continuous strap design that flows seamlessly from the body. This means we only need 2 pieces of fabric to cut out. You have the option to finish it with bias binding or a bagged lining. The curved edges and roomy pockets add both functionality and a soft, elegant touch. We'll be using a digital sewing pattern, link available in the video description below. This video sews view A, where the edges are finished with bias binding. Here's what you need. I want to mention that all the sewing steps for this bag are detailed in the pattern as well, so choose your best way of taking in information and let's get started. Here's my fabric. The exterior is a pillowcase with pretty flowers. I love those colors, but the weight of a pillowcase is not ideal for a bag. It feels like quilting cotton to me, thin and crisp. Normally a bad choice given its weight, but the pretty exterior colors really makes me want to take that risk. To make up for the weight, I'm reaching for a medium weight interfacing and I'm planning to double interface the bag. Interface both the exterior and the lining to give the bag more structure. I think it'll be good enough for this particular bag because the Swan bag by design isn't supposed to stand up on its own anyways. It will be soft and slouchy, and I'm okay with it. The lining is another pillowcase, yarn dyed with white and blue. When picking the lining, I always try to make sure it's light colored, just so I can see what's inside the bag when I fish something from it. And this red fabric is a scrap piece that I'm planning to make some bias binding out of it. I picked this red because it will highlight the red on the exterior. Just something bright for a contrast, but also a match. I think it's gonna be pretty. To start cutting out, I turn this pillowcase inside out. It's a bit short lengthwise for the bag's cutting plan, but as you can see from the inside, there's this extra length to make up for it. I cut near the top and the bottom. Both of these places have pillowcase seams. Then I open it out and get this long piece of fabric, which I can lay out the pieces like this. The lining piece, however, has seams at the side and at the top. So when I cut out and open up, I get a square. It fits this lay plan instead. After this prep, I go ahead and cut all pieces out, plus the interfacing. Moving on, interfacing is the first step. This is because I need the bag fabric to be sturdier than it is currently to hold up as a bag. It's especially important in this case since my exterior fabric is a pillowcase, which is pretty underweight for a bag. So here's how I do this. First off, I lay a back piece down on the ironing board. Lay the interfacing over it and cover it up with my favorite pressed cloth. For me, it's just a scrap piece of cotton that goes between the interfacing and my iron. Sometimes when I mix up and put the interfacing glue side up, this is what saves my iron from getting glued up on its plate. My interfacing instructions says the press cloth should be wet and press on hot for 15 seconds. So I did just that, and some more. You can see the white area has already been interfaced, because when the iron runs over it, the water on the press cloth just goes away. And repeat this for all bag and pocket pieces, exterior and lining. Okay, now that the fabrics have a healthier weight, it's time to start sewing. Darts go first because it's a detail on the bag. Better to get this done first before connecting other major parts. Not that this bag has many parts, it's a simple bag. But the principle is that we always work on the detail on each piece and then assemble them together. So it starts with folding the back piece like this. Actually, let me show you how this works with the other dart. So the fold line goes through the dart tip and the middle of the dart legs. So when folded, the two dart legs overlaps on one another. Then press and make it nice and flat. Whenever possible, I try not to sew the dart legs straight, but with a slight inward curve. This is because straight dart legs gives straight cones, but we want something that's more organic. By curving it in like this, the tip is going to be a bit more rounded and natural. I use a marker to draw this. From the edge, draw a straight line towards somewhere before the dart tip, and then taper towards it. And when sewing, the wisdom here is that we don't backstitch at the dart tip to avoid the bulk and bunching. So I like to start with the edge with a normal stitch length, and when it starts to curve, reduce the stitch length every 2 stitches until we get to 1 millimeter. Then stitch off the fabric at the tip. This small stitch length means the threads won't unravel. But still, sometimes I get paranoid about unraveling, so I put a pin between the 2 threads and then tie 2 to 3 knots here. The pin kind of buffers the stress of the knots, otherwise the tight knots will bunch up the fabric at the dart tip. Then it's time to press. I like to press it from the right side so I can see what it looks like. This is the exterior fabric, so I press the dart down. The lining should be pressed up instead. Why? Well, exterior darts face down because we don't want stuff to catch on the dart fold when we put it into the bag. And lining darts face the opposite direction because otherwise it's just too much fabric bulk at the same spot. Over here, I just use my hand to separate the fabric near the seam and then press. After pressing, it looks like this. This dart isn't steep or long because it's here to add just a little shape to the bag. You can try omitting this dart if you want, and you'll get a very flat bag because the 2 back pieces are going to be together. Here's the look of the dart on the wrong side. Also pretty neat, huh? And now just repeat and repeat for all the 8 darts on the exterior and lining. Next up is to line the pocket so it doesn't have raw edges. And after this, in step 4, we're going to attach it to the bag. Take 1 pocket exterior and 1 pocket lining and put them right side together. Sew around at 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter, leaving a hole at the bottom. My hole is about 4 fingers wide. Then shave off the excess seam allowance at curves and corners. Curves and corners need this special treatment because when you turn right side out, any extra fabric from the inside will either tug the seam or bunch up. So these places won't be staying flat otherwise. The straight lines, however, don't really need this. Then I reach my fingers into this hole, drag some fabric out of it. Keep dragging and press. It's always the pressing that does all the magic. So on the bottom here, there is still the opening, but I press the seam allowance inwards so you can barely tell the hole is there. This is what we want before attaching it to the bag. And then repeat for the other pocket. Okay, with the pocket lined, attaching them to the bag is just a matter of top stitching. To baste the pocket onto the bag, a lot of people use pins all around, but my secret weapon is this glue stick. I think mine is Elmer's. Nothing fancy, just plain everyday school glue from the grocery store. Give your favorite school glue brand a try and you'd be surprised. I smear the glue stick around the pocket on the wrong side and then pat onto the back piece. For me, the glue stick never gums up the needle and it will be gone after a wash, quick and easy. Once basted, I take it to the sewing machine. Start with a little triangle to reinforce this pocket opening, since this part will sustain a lot of stress when we use the pocket. Then edge stitch at 2 to 3 millimeters, that's 1/8 of an inch, inside the pocket. And with the same little triangle on the other side. Usually we prefer a slightly longer stitch length for top stitching for a better visual effect. For this bag, I put one on the exterior and another one on the lining. So when the bag is finished, I have one pocket on the inside and another on the outside. And for reinforcing the pocket opening, you're not limited to just little triangles. On this exterior one, I did the triangles, and on the lining, I did bar tacks. So a couple of zigzag stitches really close together, and then resume that normal stitching, just like this. Next up, we'll connect the two back pieces into one long piece, something like this. And we can also do a bit of fitting while we're at it. Here's how. Take two back pieces, put them right side together like this. There's a little box at 90 degrees at the top of the strap. Look at the edge of the fabric, not the interfacing, because I cut the interfacing a bit shorter so that it won't add bulk at the seam. This is the seam allowance, a bit larger at 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters. This is larger because if you don't have a lining, you'll do a flat fell seam here. To be able to do the fitting, baste the seam on the strap. Basting just means to use the longest stitch length on our sewing machine because it's easy to unpick later. Then before fitting, there's one important step to do that I regret not having done it here. I'd stay stitch along the straps like this. Same for the other side. Stay stitch basically means basting within the seam allowance, but with only one piece of fabric under the presser foot, not two. This is because the straps are on the bias. They're not cut on the straight grain. If you think of all the things we do during fitting, like sticking an arm there, then hanging it over the shoulder, this is a lot of movements. The strap will get stretched out under the stress because the strap's edges are raw and on the bias, so they're not stable enough to sustain all those shuffling. And if the piece is stretched longer than it should be, it won't align with the other back piece when it comes to finishing the bag. So this one line of stay stitching, well, actually 2 lines, will help bearing the weight of the shuffling so the straps are less stretched out. Then I just throw it over my shoulder to see if I like how long the strap is. Say if I think the straps are too long. If I were just to pinch something down the straps like this, the fabric will bunch up because the straps are cut on an angle. Instead, unpick the strap seam and overlap them lower down, then draw the stitch line parallel to the top edge like this. This line is about 2 inches or 5 centimeters from the original stitch line, and that adjustment I think is a bit too much, as you can see here. So if I based on this line and then take the bag up vertically, the back body does not stay flat right now. There's a little bump over here and also on the back side. This is because we kind of squeeze the straps closer together than they should be at the top. So just be careful not to adjust the straps by too much. Say no more than 1 inch or so. That's 2 to 3 centimeters. Well, what if I do want to adjust the straps by a lot? Like if I want the bag to be a crossbody bag instead of a shoulder bag. Well, in that case, the adjustment is best done on the pattern piece before cutting out the fabric. This picture comes from the sewing pattern itself. Basically, cut the strap pattern piece somewhere in the middle, push the upper piece straight up or down to the length you want, and smooth out the curves on the strap. This fix is better than what we did before because the top tip of the strap still stays in the middle of the bag after the adjustment, so there's no horizontal tweak happening anywhere on the bag. Phew! That's a long digression, but fitting is a long topic that we're just touching a tiny bit here. We'll see more of fitting when it comes to sewing garments. So going back to the bag, we have the strap sewn together at the right length. And now, stitch the straps together for the exterior piece at the same length. On this picture, it looks like the lengths are kind of different, but it's actually the same. The difference in the look is because I trimmed the seam allowance on the lining to be shorter. This is usually called grading the seam allowance. Well, why do I do this? You see, when the 2 layers of straps get pressed against one another, this piece of 4 layers of fabric can get a bit bulky. The bulky bump could be pretty visible from the outside, especially after a couple of uses and washes. To make it less bulky, we could trim down one side of the seam allowance so the bulk steps up more slowly. And which side to trim? Well, the common wisdom is to trim the inner side because the outer and longer seam allowance now covers up the inner layer. So if you look from the outside, you see it as if there's only one layer of seam allowance. And now we have a long back piece, but the bag is finally taking shape. We're so close to the finish line. In this final step, we're just wrapping the bias tape all around the back. Line up the exterior and the lining wrong side together. There are notches all around the back to help me match up the exact points. Then I baste the exterior and the lining together everywhere along this piece. This is a very, very long baste, almost 4¼ yards, or 4 meters long. I've never did a seam this long before. In case you're wondering why, this basting helps lining up all the layers because we're going to fold it into the shape of the real bag like this. Basting means we have less lining up to worry about. And also, baste again to the bag's side and bottom. This is the same reasoning. The layers will stay put when I apply the bias binding in the next step. So now putting this bag aside and digging out my bias binding. I have to make the binding myself from scrap fabric. So I'm now going to show you how to do this. Feel free to skip forward if you already have a binding ready to go. So the bias tape we're going to use here in the Swan bag is called a double fold bias tape, which is folded into 4 equal sections. Here is how to make some. First off, draw some lines at 45 degrees to the straight grain of the fabric. In our case, the lines are 1½ inches apart, that's 4 centimeters. Dividing it by 4 equal sections, it means the width of the finished tape is 3/8 of an inch, that's 1 centimeter wide. To connect them into a long strip, I usually draw the seam allowance on the strip first, then overlap it with another strip at 90 degrees, right side together. Align them so that the seam line hit the lowest part of this shape on both sides, then sew on this line. Open it out and turn to the wrong side. If you separate the seam allowance and press them open, you should see the seam line at 45 degrees. Since part of the seam allowance goes outside the strip, I snip off the excess like this. And then turning to the right side, a continuous strip with a seam. Theoretically, you could connect the 2 strips at 90 degrees, something like this, instead of 45. But when you fold it 4 times, the seams get very bulky. That's why we usually make an angled seam at 45. Anyways, just cut and connect all strips until they are long enough for this bag. Now I'm taking this long strip to my ironing board because we're going to fold it into 4 sections. First, fold it in half like this and press, opening it out, and fold one side to the center like this to give us the quarter fold. Press. Same for the other side, and press. Finally, fold back onto the center and enclosing all the raw edges. Press again. So now it's time to repeat those folds throughout this long strip. The double fold bias tape is done. Making the strip from start to finish takes me about 1 hour and 15 minutes, versus in a haberdashery store, they're usually just a couple of dollars. So you get to decide whether it's worth your time and enjoyment to make your own or buy from the store. Okay, now going back to the bag. We're going to wrap the bias tape all around the bag. We start at one break point and end at another point, like this. To start off, line up one end of the tape to a break point, with the tape kind of biting into the bag, like Pac-Man. This is as far as I can go without getting the bag onto my sewing machine, because I'm getting close to the break point. Here at the break point, the tape transitions from wrapping one layer into biting two layers at once, and lower overlaps with the start of the tape. By the way, this overlap is the reason behind why we have to sew the tape with only one pass of top stitching. We'll have to line things up as we go. While sewing, I recommend using a thread color similar to the tape because our one pass technique isn't all that stable. The matching color makes crooked seam lines less noticeable. I like to line up the edge of the binding with the center notch of my foot and put my needle 2 millimeters away to the side. 2 millimeters is the smallest amount for me that tends to reliably catch the binding on the back. But that's just for me, from my own little experimentation. Try for yourself and decide how far you want the needle to go. Oh, and I'm using my regular presser foot here because I see better with this transparent toe. But if you have a specialty foot, like the stitch in the ditch foot, feel free to try it out here too. An extra tip here. When I stitch, I can see the front side, but not the back side. What usually happens is that the line of stitching may slide off the tape at the back side, which is always a headache. To avoid it, I try to roll the tape to the back side of my bag with my fingers so that I'm more likely to catch the binding at the back side. Same reasoning to this. If your store-bought bias tape is slightly longer on one side, put that longer side at the back side. As a stitch, every once in a while, I flip over the section I just did and check if the stitch veers off at the back side. If so, I adjust my tape position or needle position until I'm on track again. This is a long seam, so expect to take a lot of time on it. Oh, and don't forget to check your bobbin before you start. Before I arrive at the other break point, remember that the other break point is also having overlaps. I wrap the tape all the way through the end, cut up the excess, and then have the tape bite into the tail, essentially covering the tape's end. Then I sew over the break point, goes around this wrap, and comes back. And finally, use the knotting trick we talked about earlier to knot off the thread tail without backstitching. With this long tail, I like to thread it into a hand sewing needle and bury it somewhere nearby. Then snip off the excess. And now, as we take the bag off the sewing machine, give it a check all along the tape at the back side. And inevitably and unfortunately, we'll notice that at some sections, the stitch line doesn't catch the tape. What now? I'm using a scrap piece to demonstrate this, because it didn't happen to me this time. You know what? The first time I tried, the stitch line fell off at 4 different sections. But the second time, I caught them all. So practice definitely makes a difference. But yeah, not a lot of us have the extra time to do this twice, right? So at the sections where the stitch line falls off, I just whip it together with a couple of whip stitches. Giving it a final press, and we're done with this bag. I hope this video gives you everything you need to make it yourself, and I know you're going to create the most amazing, unique bag in the world. Don't forget to click the link to this sewing pattern to get started and have fun.